Tonight, we are going to talk about whether a generation ship could survive after Earth goes silent. Not after an explosion, not after an alien attack, and not because the ship suddenly fails, but because one day, after centuries of traveling through deep space, the messages from Earth simply stop arriving. For the people on board, Earth may already feel more like a story than a real place. They were born inside corridors, artificial light, recycled air, and metal walls. They have never seen an ocean, never felt wind, and never stood under an open sky. But as long as messages from Earth still arrived, even years late, the ship was not truly alone. Somewhere behind them, humanity was still speaking. Then, the signal ends. At first, it might seem like a technical failure, then a delay, then a problem with the antennas. But after enough silence, the question becomes impossible to avoid. Is Earth still there? Did civilization collapse? Did humanity forget the ship? Or has the generation ship become the last living piece of the human story? So tonight, the question is simple. Could a generation ship survive after Earth goes silent? Before we begin tonight's journey, subscribe to the channel if you want more calm space documentaries like this. Leave a like if you enjoy deep space survival stories, and write in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is where you are right now. Tonight, you are watching the Space for Sleep channel, talking about could a generation ship survive after Earth goes silent? The first thing to understand is that a generation ship would not begin its journey as a lonely world. At launch, it would still belong to Earth, even if the ship was designed to travel for centuries, even if no one on board expected to return home, and even if the first crew knew their children or grandchildren might be the ones who reached the destination, the ship would not feel completely separated in the beginning. Behind it, there would still be a planet full of voices, instructions, memories, arguments, music, science, and history. Earth would still be speaking. The first messages might arrive almost like normal communication. During the early part of the journey, when the ship is still inside the solar system or not too far beyond it, the delay might be annoying but understandable. A message sent from Earth would take minutes, hours, or eventually days to reach the ship. A reply would take the same amount of time to travel back. The crew would already know they are leaving, but Earth would still feel present. Mission Control would still send updates. Families might still send recorded messages. Scientists might send corrections, discoveries, and new observations. Children born on the ship might hear voices from grandparents who still lived under the real sky. In those early years, the messages would be more than information. They would be proof that the ship had not become completely alone. The people on board could look at the stars outside, feel the vibration of machinery around them, breathe recycled air, and still know that somewhere behind them, the world that built them was awake. That matters more than it sounds. A generation ship is not just a spacecraft. It is a human society stretched across time. The people on board need food, water, air, power, and maintenance. But they also need meaning. They need to believe that the journey is part of something larger than themselves. If Earth keeps speaking, then the mission still has a living connection to the civilization that began it. The ship may be far away, but it is still being remembered. At first, messages from Earth would help hold the identity of the ship together. They would remind the crew why they left. They would carry news of the planet they came from. They would preserve the sense that the mission is not just a drifting metal world in the dark, but one branch of a larger human story. There would be official messages, mission updates, engineering advice, scientific data, navigation corrections, historical records, political changes, and medical knowledge. But there would also be personal messages, birth announcements, farewells, songs, stories, recordings of rain, videos of forests, voices from people who will never see the ship again, but still want to be part of it. For the first generation, these messages would hurt. and comfort at the same time. They would be beautiful because they prove home still exists. They would be painful because home is getting farther away. Every year, the delay grows. A message sent today may arrive later and later. A reply becomes less like conversation and more like sending a letter into history. At first, people may still speak as if Earth is current. Then, slowly, the timing changes the emotional shape of every message. A child might receive a recording from a relative who was alive when it was sent, but may be gone by the time it is heard. A crew member might answer a question knowing the person who asked it will be much older before the answer returns. A celebration might arrive after the event it celebrated has already become memory. Communication does not stop at once, it stretches. The ship and Earth begin to live at different rhythms. That is where deep space changes relationships. Distance does not cut the connection immediately. It thins it. It makes every message older. It makes every reply slower. It turns real conversation into an exchange between moving worlds that are no longer sharing the same moment. But even old messages still matter. For the people on board, a delayed signal from Earth may still be enough. It may not be a live conversation, but it is still evidence. The signal says that Earth existed when the message was sent. It says there were still people, still transmitters, still minds aiming their thoughts across the dark. Even if the news is years late, even if the faces on the screen have aged or died by the time the crew sees them, the message still carries one important truth. Home was still there. That truth may become one of the most valuable things on the ship. A generation ship would be filled with systems designed to keep bodies alive. But messages from Earth would help keep the mission alive. They would remind the crew that their world did not begin in metal corridors. They would show children oceans they will never touch, mountains they will never climb, animals they will never hear, and skies they will never stand beneath. The ship may have archives, but archives are frozen. It might contain technical data, weather reports, political news, scientific updates, family recordings, or a simple confirmation that the next transmission window is expected later. The crew would receive it, they would store it, they would continue, and no one would know that after that, nothing new would come. That is the frightening part. The last message from Earth might not feel like the end of anything when it arrives. It would simply be the newest signal. The crew would listen, analyze, answer, and wait for the next one. The ship would continue moving forward. The engines would operate. The lights would stay on. The farms would grow. Children would go to lessons. Engineers would check systems. People would argue, sleep, eat, celebrate, repair, and live. The silence would not announce itself immediately. It would arrive as an absence. At first, no one would panic. Space communication is complex. A missing signal does not mean Earth has died. It delayed, corrupted, or simply not where the ship expected it to be. The first missed message would be strange. The second would be concerning. The third would become difficult to ignore. But even then, hope would remain. On a generation ship, people would be trained not to assume the worst immediately. Deep space systems fail. Antennas drift. Software makes mistakes. Dust can damage exposed components. Power can fluctuate. Navigation errors can change pointing angles. The crew would search for technical explanations first, because technical explanations are easier to live with than the other possibilities. They would check the receivers. They would check the antenna alignment. They would review the signal logs. They would compare expected transmission times against the growing light delay. They would ask whether the ship is listening in the right direction, at the right frequency, with the right sensitivity. And for a while, all of that would feel responsible. Maybe the problem is here. Maybe Earth is still speaking, but the ship cannot hear it. That possibility would be both comforting and terrifying. Comforting, because it means Earth may still exist. Terrifying, because it means the ship itself may be losing one of its most important senses. A generation ship without communication is not blind exactly, but it becomes deaf to home. It can still see stars, still run its systems, still follow its mission, but the voice behind it disappears. The people on board would not all react the same way. Some would stay calm. They would say the silence means nothing yet. They would remind everyone that deep space communication has always been fragile. They would insist that the ship must continue normal operations until the evidence is clearer. Others would begin to worry privately. They would replay the last message again and again, searching for something hidden inside it. A change in tone, a missing detail, a strange delay, a line that now feels more important than it did before. Humans are very good at finding patterns after something goes wrong. Some would be angry. They might blame the communications team, the ship's leaders, old design decisions, Earth authorities, or the mission itself. On a small, closed world, uncertainty spreads quickly. Silence is not neutral. Silence creates stories, and stories create fear. The last message might become the most studied recording in the ship's history. At first, it would be examined for technical reasons. Was the signal strength normal? Was the timestamp correct? Was the encoding clean? Did it include any warning? Did Earth mention infrastructure problems, political instability, or power shortages? Was there anything that suggested the next transmission could fail? Later, it would be studied emotionally. People would remember where they were when they heard it. Children might be told that this was the last time Earth spoke. Families might preserve private copies. Historians on board might begin marking time as before and after the silence, even if leaders try not to use that language yet. But in the beginning, the ship would resist that conclusion. It would be too heavy to accept. Earth cannot simply be silent. Earth is the origin. Earth is the reason the ship exists. Earth is the place in the archives, the blue planet in the images, the sound of rain in the recordings, the gravity no one on board has ever felt naturally, the sky no one on board has ever seen for themselves. Even people born generations later may carry Earth as an idea so large it feels almost permanent. So when Earth stops answering, the first reaction may not be grief, it may be denial, not because the crew is foolish, but because the alternative is too large. If Earth is gone, or if civilization has collapsed, or if humanity has forgotten the ship, then the mission has changed without permission. The people on board did not choose that moment. They did not vote to become separated from the living human world. They were simply moving through space when the voice behind them stopped, and the ship still has to keep going. That is one of the cruelest parts of the situation. Nothing about silence allows the ship to pause its basic needs. The crops still need care. The oxygen system still needs monitoring. Waste still needs recycling. Children still need education. Power systems still need maintenance. Repairs still need to happen. People still get sick. People still fall in love. People still argue. People still die. A generation ship cannot stop being a world just because Earth stops speaking. Life on board would continue, and that continuation might feel almost insulting at first. How can the lights stay on when Earth may be gone? How can people eat breakfast when the origin of humanity may be silent? How can a child be born into a ship that no longer knows whether home exists? But that is exactly why the ship was built. A generation ship is designed around the idea that it may need to continue without immediate help. It is supposed to be self-sustaining. It is supposed to survive long gaps, delayed communication, and distance. In practical terms, the loss of Earth's signal may not kill the ship immediately. The engines still work. The farms still grow. The water still cycles. The hull still holds pressure. Technically, the ship may be alive. Psychologically, something has changed. This is where the last messages become more than old data. They become a boundary. Before them, the ship was traveling away from Earth, but still connected to it. After them, the ship is traveling into a different kind of darkness. Not just physical darkness, but historical darkness. The people on board no longer know whether they are one mission among many, or the last surviving branch of the species. That uncertainty may be more frightening than knowing the truth. If Earth sent one final message saying goodbye, at least the crew would know. They could grieve. They could make decisions. They could write new laws, change the mission, and teach children what happened. But silence gives them no clean story. It leaves every possibility open. Maybe Earth is gone. Maybe Earth survived but lost the ability to transmit. Maybe Earth chose to stop. Maybe the ship's receiver failed. Maybe another signal is still coming, but from so far behind the delay that it will arrive years later. Maybe humanity has spread elsewhere and no longer thinks about this ship. Maybe the mission is still remembered by no one. The horror is not one answer. The horror is not knowing which answer is true. That is why the first stage after Earth goes silent would not be total collapse. It would be investigation, waiting, debate, technical checks, emotional tension. The ship would not instantly become a doomed society. It would become a society with one impossible question sitting in the center of every room. Why is Earth not answering? And the longer the silence continues, the more that question changes. At first, it is but before the ship reaches that point, it has to pass through the hardest early phase. The moment when silence first arrives. The moment when everyone still hopes there is a technical explanation. The moment when engineers search the systems, leaders choose careful words, and ordinary people begin to feel that something enormous may have happened behind them. Because Earth does not go silent all at once in the human mind. It becomes silent slowly, one missed signal at a time. That is how the silence would first become real. Not as a dramatic alarm, not as a single moment where everyone on the ship suddenly understands that Earth may be gone. At first, it would be small, almost ordinary. A scheduled transmission window would arrive. The communication team would prepare for it. The receivers would be ready. The antennas would hold their alignment. And then there would be nothing. No clear voice. No new data packet. No confirmation pulse from Earth. Just background noise and waiting. The first reaction would probably be procedural, not emotional. The crew would not immediately gather in panic. The ship would not announce to every corridor that Earth had gone silent. The communications officers would repeat the check. They would adjust the receiver. They would compare the expected arrival time with the latest distance calculations. They would ask if the signal was simply weak, late, distorted, or arriving through interference. Because in deep space, missing one signal does not prove anything. Space is difficult. Machines fail. Clocks drift. Antennas move out of perfect alignment. Software can misread a schedule. A power system on Earth could have gone offline. A relay station could be damaged. A transmission could be corrupted, delayed, or aimed slightly wrong. The first explanation would be technical, because technical explanations are easier to survive. If the problem is technical, then it can be fixed. If the problem is Earth, then everything changes. So the ship would begin with the easier possibility. They would assume the problem might be on their side. Engineers would run diagnostics through the communication system. They would test the receivers against known background sources. They would point antennas toward calibration targets. They would review the ship's orientation and compare it against the predicted position of Earth behind them. They would check whether the ship had drifted out of perfect alignment, whether a sensor had degraded, or whether software was filtering out a weak signal by mistake. This could take hours, then days, and for a while, the silence would remain private. Only the people who needed to know would know. The command crew, the communications team, the engineers responsible for long-range systems. They would be careful with their language, because on a generation ship, a sentence can travel faster than truth. If someone says Earth is gone too early, fear begins before evidence. If leaders hide the silence too long, trust begins to break. So they would choose controlled words. Delayed transmission, signal loss, receiver investigation. No confirmation yet. They would avoid saying what everyone is thinking. Earth is not answering. The ship would continue operating normally because it has to. Meals would be served. Children would attend lessons. Maintenance schedules would continue. Hydroponic farms would still need light and nutrient balance. Water systems would still need monitoring. The ship cannot suspend life because of one missing signal. A generation ship survives by routine, and routine would be the first defense against fear. But people would notice small things. A communications officer leaving a meal early, a leader speaking with unusual calm, engineers entering restricted sections more often than usual, a scheduled public update from Earth being delayed without a satisfying explanation. On a small, closed world, people read patterns quickly. A generation ship may hold thousands of people, maybe more, but it is still a contained society. Information does not stay sealed forever. The silence would spread first as rumor, not announcement. Did the Earth transmission come in? Why has no one played the new archive update? Why are the antenna teams working double shifts? Why did the captain cancel the cultural broadcast? At first, leaders might say that the signal is delayed and the team is investigating. That would be true, but the truth would not be comforting for long. The people on board would know enough about deep space communication to understand that delays are expected, but unexplained silence is different. They would know the schedule. They would know the ship's distance. They would know how long a normal delay should be, and they would start counting. The first day might feel manageable. The second day would feel heavier. The first week would change the atmosphere. Not because anyone has proof that Earth is gone, but because the ship has entered a new kind of waiting. Waiting for a signal is not like waiting for a door to open. It is like waiting for reality to choose one meaning over another. Every hour without contact keeps all possibilities alive. Technical failure, Earth failure, political decision, natural disaster, civilizational collapse. Simple delay, something no one has imagined. Silence is terrifying because it refuses to explain itself. If an emergency message arrived, the crew would know what to do next. If Earth said a transmitter had failed, they could adjust. If Earth said goodbye, they could grieve and plan. But silence gives no instructions. It gives only space. So the ship would listen harder. The communication systems would be pushed beyond normal routines. Antennas would scan wider bands. Receivers would search for weak signals outside the expected channels. Engineers would compare old transmissions to the current noise. Maybe Earth had changed frequency. Maybe the signal had degraded. Maybe a backup beacon was still active. Maybe there was a faint carrier wave buried under interference. Every tiny anomaly would become important. A weak spike in the data might make people hold their breath. A pattern in the noise might become a rumor within minutes. A failed reconstruction might feel like grief. The ship would begin to behave like someone listening for a voice in another room after the lights go out. There would also be arguments among the specialists. One engineer might believe the antenna array is misaligned by a fraction of a degree. Another might insist the receiver hardware is functioning normally. A software team might suspect a corrupted filter. The leadership might demand probabilities, but probabilities would not satisfy anyone. How likely is it that the problem is us? How likely is it that the problem is Earth? No, one could answer with certainty. and uncertainty would become the real crisis. The ship's leaders would eventually have to decide when to tell everyone more clearly. A generation ship cannot be managed like a short military mission forever. The people on board are not just crew following orders. They are the society the ship exists to protect. If Earth has stopped answering, or if the ship may have lost contact, everyone's life is affected. But revealing the truth too early could destabilize the ship. Waiting too long could destroy trust. This is the kind of decision that becomes dangerous in a closed world. On Earth, people can escape a crisis by walking outside or turning off the screen. On a generation ship, there is nowhere else. Fear has no open sky to dissolve into. It circulates through corridors, classrooms, maintenance decks, and sleeping quarters. So the announcement would probably be careful, not dramatic, not final. Something like this: the scheduled transmission from Earth has not been received. The communications team is investigating possible technical causes. No conclusion has been reached. All ship systems remain stable. Normal operations will continue. Updates will be provided when available. The words would be calm, but the ship would hear the silence underneath them. For some people, the announcement would be the first moment the possibility becomes real. They may have heard rumors, but rumors still leave room for denial. An official statement changes the shape of fear. It does not say Earth is gone. It does not say humanity has collapsed. But it says something that cannot be unheard. Earth was expected. Earth did not arrive. After that, the ship would become quieter in a way that is hard to measure. Not silent, because life continues. Machines hum. Water moves through pipes. People speak. Children ask questions, but conversations change. People lower their voices. Public spaces feel different. The latest Earth broadcast, which might once have been background comfort, is now missing. A scheduled ritual has been broken. The communications team would keep working. They would probably establish a repeating search schedule. Scan expected channels, scan backup channels, recheck direction. Run diagnostics, compare every receiver, use every antenna. Attempt to transmit back, even knowing the reply may take years. The ship might send a message toward Earth. We did not receive the scheduled transmission. Please confirm status. Repeating across primary and backup frequencies. Ship systems stable. Awaiting response. The message would leave the ship and travel backward through space at the speed of light. It would cross the distance the ship had spent years creating, toward the tiny direction where Earth should be. And then the ship would wait again. This is where distance becomes cruel. Even if Earth receives the message, the answer cannot come quickly. If the ship is light years away, a question may take years to reach Earth, and years more for the answer to return. The crew cannot know whether their call was heard, whether anyone is there to receive it, or whether nothing will ever come. Waiting becomes part of the architecture. The ship is built from metal, water, air, and machinery. But after Earth goes silent, it is also built from waiting. That is why the first phase after silence would test the ship's culture. A generation ship must be more than technically self-sustaining. It must have ways to handle uncertainty, public trust, transparent procedures, and a society strong enough to admit what it does not know. Because the most honest statement may also be the hardest. 1. We do not know why Earth is silent. That sentence can either stabilize the ship or fracture it, depending on whether people trust the ones saying it. Meanwhile, the technical search would continue. The crew might discover minor faults and repair them, only to find that Earth still does not answer. They might replace components, recalibrate antennas, reboot systems, and scan again. Each repair would create a small wave of hope. Maybe this was it. Maybe we fixed it. Maybe the next scan will find Earth. And if nothing appears, hope would fall again. That suspended state cannot last forever. At some point, the ship would need to establish a new normal. It could not treat every day as an emergency. Constant emergency destroys people. The silence would have to be folded into routine. Communication scans would continue, but they would become scheduled work. Public updates would continue, but less frequently. Schools would begin teaching children what is known, what is unknown, and why the ship is still operating. A generation ship cannot survive by remaining emotionally frozen in the moment Earth went silent. It must eventually teach people how to live after the silence. Not only how to mourn before it, but that process begins painfully while the question is still unresolved and the last signal is still recent enough to feel alive. The ship must survive the earliest emotional shock. It must survive the rumors, the technical uncertainty, the repeated false hopes, and the slow realization that the silence may not be temporary. The ship enters a deeper problem, because the worst part of Earth going silent is not only that no one answers, it is that the distance makes every answer uncertain. The ship cannot look out a window and see what happened. It cannot send someone back to check. It cannot ask a question and receive a quick reply. Even if Earth is still alive, the truth is buried under years of light travel, delay, and doubt. The silence is not just an absence of sound. It is an absence of certainty. And in deep space, uncertainty can be more dangerous than bad news. That is because distance changes everything. On Earth, silence usually means something simple. A phone does not ring. A message is not answered. The person on the other end is still somewhere inside the same world. And if the silence becomes worrying enough, someone can check. A door can be knocked on. A road can be traveled. There is usually some way to shorten the distance between the question and the answer. A generation ship does not have that comfort. If Earth stops answering, the ship cannot look back and see the truth. It cannot send a crew home to investigate. It cannot ask a question and wait a few minutes for someone to explain what happened. The ship may be so far away that every attempt to communicate is really a message sent into the past, aimed at a world that may already have changed by the time the answer could ever return. That is the problem with distance. It does not only separate places, it separates knowledge. When the ship was closer to Earth, communication might have felt delayed but still understandable. Minutes, hours, days, even weeks. Those delays are difficult, but they still feel connected to normal human life. A reply still feels like part of the same conversation, even if it is slow. But as the ship moves deeper into interstellar space, the delay grows until communication stops feeling like conversation at all. It becomes history moving in both directions. A message from Earth may arrive years after it was sent. By the time the ship receives it, the people who recorded it may be older, changed, or gone. A personal recording may contain a voice from someone who is no longer alive. And yet, for the ship, after the silence begins, the message might be simple. We did not receive your last transmission. Please confirm status. The crew knows it may take years to reach Earth. Then, even if Earth replies immediately, the answer may take years to return. During all of that waiting, the ship remains trapped in sudden certainty. The question is already old before it arrives. The answer will be older before it comes back. By the time the crew receives any reply, the situation on Earth may have changed again. This is why deep space communication can become psychologically painful. The ship does not simply wait for news. It waits for news from a different time. Every message is a fossil of a moment that no longer exists. Every silence may represent a disaster, a technical delay, a political choice, or nothing at all. The crew is not only separated from Earth, they are separated from Earth's present. That is why the silence cannot be interpreted quickly. If Earth were nearby, A missed message would become suspicious fast. But if Earth is light years away, the ship must think in years. A reply that might answer everything may already be on its way, but still too far away to detect. Hope can survive because distance leaves room for it. Fear can survive for the same reason. Distance gives every possibility more time to live. Some people may believe Earth is gone. They may say the silence is too long, too complete, and too unexplained. They may believe the ship must stop waiting emotionally and accept that it is now independent. Others may insist Earth is still there. They may point to the delay, to the fragility of communication, to the possibility of equipment failure. They may say that giving up on Earth too early is a betrayal of the mission. Some may believe the ship itself is the problem. Maybe the antenna array is damaged in a way no diagnostic can see. Maybe the receivers are miscalibrated. Maybe the ship is listening in the wrong place. Maybe Earth is still broadcasting, and the ship has become deaf without knowing it. Others may imagine something worse. Not destruction, abandonment. Maybe Earth survived, but forgot them. Maybe the mission became politically inconvenient. Maybe the civilization that launched them changed its priorities. Maybe the people on Earth decided that a ship already beyond reach was no longer worth speaking to. That possibility may be even more painful than disaster. Because if Earth is gone, then silence is tragedy. But if Earth is alive and simply stopped answering, then silence becomes rejection. The distance makes both impossible to prove, and because nothing can be proven, belief becomes personal. That is the power of distance. It creates space not only between the ship and Earth, but between people living on the same ship. The silence comes from outside, but the interpretations are born inside. Over time, those interpretations can become identities: return, independence, or loyalty to the original mission. And all of them can claim uncertainty as evidence. People want clean answers when they are afraid. They want a cause, a face, a disaster, a mistake. They want the silence to become something they can name. But deep space refuses to hurry. The distance keeps the truth out of reach. But it cannot calculate meaning from nothing. This is why the problem with distance is not only scientific, it is human. The ship is moving through a universe where information has a speed limit. Nothing travels faster than light. That rule may sound abstract when we talk about stars and galaxies, but inside a generation ship, it becomes personal. It means a child may ask whether Earth is still alive, and the honest answer may be, "We do not know, and we may not know for many years." That answer is hard to build a childhood around. The older generation may still remember regular Earth messages. They may remember when the ship felt connected, even if the connection was delayed. But younger generations may inherit only silence and explanation. To them, Earth may become less like a home and more like a distant origin that adults argue about. The delay of communication becomes the delay of identity. At first, the ship can still say, "We are from Earth." Later, it may say, "We were sent by Earth." Later still, if no message returns, it may say, "We remember Earth." Those are not the same sentence. Each one places the ship farther away, not only in distance, but in meaning. The universe does not care how badly they need closure. That is the cruel calm of physics. The ship may be desperate, but the signal still travels at the same speed. The question still takes years to reach the place it is asking about. The answer still takes years to return, if anyone is there to send it. So the crew must learn to separate urgency from possibility. They may feel that the answer is needed now, but the universe will not deliver it now. This can create a kind of slow madness if the ship is not prepared. People may spend years waiting for a reply that may never come. They may build expectations around dates. The year the response should arrive, the month the signal window opens, the day the antenna points home again. If nothing arrives, the society is wounded again. A generation ship cannot survive forever in that emotional rhythm. Eventually, it must change its relationship with Earth. Not abandon it, not forget it, but stop letting every missed signal reopen the same wound. The ship must be able to continue the mission while still listening. That is easier to say than to do, because the silence is always there. This is the point where the ship must begin to think differently. In the beginning, the question is, how do we restore contact? Then it becomes, how do we live until contact returns? But if enough time passes, the question becomes much larger. How do we live if contact never returns? That is the moment when distance stops being only a communications problem and becomes a civilization problem. The ship is no longer just waiting for Earth. It is deciding what kind of society it becomes while Earth is silent. It must decide how much authority the old mission still has, and how much of the ship's future should be shaped by a planet that may no longer exist. None of these questions can wait forever. The ship may be physically moving toward its destination, but politically and emotionally, it is standing at a crossroads. Continue as if Earth is still there? Continue as if Earth is gone? Change nothing until proof arrives? Change everything because proof may never come. Distance makes every option dangerous. That is the deeper horror of the distance. The ship may have incredible technology, closed ecosystems, long-life reactors, rotating habitats, advanced medicine, autonomous repair systems, artificial gravity, and engines that can push a human world through the dark. But none of that can change the speed of a message. None of it can make Earth present again. A generation ship may be one of the most advanced machines ever built, and still be helpless against waiting. This helplessness shapes the next stage of the crisis. Once the crew understands that distance prevents certainty, the mind begins to fill the silence with possible causes. People start asking not only why Earth is not answering, but what kind of event could make an entire planet go quiet? Was it war, collapse, a technological failure, a deliberate choice, a disaster no one predicted, or something stranger? Not that Earth died, but that it moved on without them. That is where fear begins to take form, because silence by itself is empty. But the human mind does not leave emptiness alone. It fills it with stories. And the first stories would probably be the darkest ones. When Earth stops answering, the crew would not begin with calm philosophy. They would begin with fear. Even disciplined people, trained for long missions and educated in deep space communication, would still be human. They would still imagine causes. They would still try to turn silence into a shape they can understand. The first fear would be disaster, not because it is the only explanation, but because it is the loudest one. A generation ship may have left Earth centuries earlier, but the people on board would still know the old dangers. They would know about wars, climate instability, pandemics, impacts, technological collapse, and systems too complex for anyone to fully control. Earth may look peaceful in the archives, blue and bright and alive, but the history inside those archives would not be peaceful. The crew would know that civilizations can break. So when the signal stops, some minds would go there first. Maybe there was a war. Maybe the nations that maintained the transmitters collapsed. Maybe the power grids failed. Maybe the orbital relays were destroyed. Maybe Earth itself survived, but the civilization capable of speaking across interstellar distance did not. This possibility would feel realistic enough to be terrifying. A generation ship does not need Earth to be physically destroyed for the silence to make sense. It only needs the communication network to fail. A planet can still have oceans, forests, cities, and people, while no longer having the ability to aim a signal at a ship light years away. Earth dead, Earth wounded, Earth alive but unable to speak. All of them arrive as silence. That is what would make the first fears so difficult to manage. The crew would not be reacting to one confirmed event. They would be reacting to a list of possible worlds, all hidden behind the same missing signal. One person might imagine cities without power. Another might imagine the transmitters destroyed in orbit. Another might imagine a peaceful Earth that simply lost the ability to reach them. Another might imagine a living Earth that no longer cares. Each imagined Earth would create a different emotion: grief, hope, anger, loyalty, suspicion. And all of those emotions would exist inside the same ship at the same time. For a while, the most practical fear would be that Earth's technology failed, not that humanity died, but that the chain between Earth and the ship broke somewhere. A generation ship might depend on deep space transmitters, relay stations, power systems, and teams trained to maintain them. Even a strong civilization can lose a specialized system. That thought would disturb the people on board, because it suggests Earth does not have to die to become silent. It only has to stop choosing them. A generation ship is built on inherited purpose. The first crew may have chosen the mission, but later generations did not. They were born into it. Their loyalty depends on the idea that the mission still matters. Earth's messages help confirm that. Each signal says, "You are still part of us. You are still remembered." Without those messages, the mission must generate its own meaning. And at first, that may not be easy. This matters because later generations on board did not vote to leave Earth. They inherited the journey. The first crew may have understood the sacrifice personally, but their descendants live with the consequences. Earth's messages help explain why their lives are shaped by a decision made long before they were born. When those messages stop, the explanation has to come from inside the ship. That is a dangerous transition. A mission that once felt supported can begin to feel imposed. A destiny can begin to feel like a prison. The ship is still moving toward the same destination, but the emotional contract behind the mission has changed. If Earth is no longer speaking, then the people on board must decide whether the old promise still has power. In that way, Earth's silence could create politics, not ordinary politics about small policy questions, but identity politics in the deepest sense. What are we? A mission from Earth? A child of Earth? A stranded society? A new civilization? The last humans? A forgotten experiment? Each answer leads to a different future. Some people would fear that the mission is now pointless. If Earth is gone, who is the mission for? If humanity collapsed, does reaching another star still matter? If the ship is alone, is the original destination still the right one? These questions would not necessarily destroy the mission, but they would change its emotional weight. For some, the silence would become a call to continue. If Earth is gone, then the ship must survive. The mission is no longer optional. It becomes a continuation of the species, or at least of one branch of it. Every farm, every repair, every birth, every lesson becomes part of preserving humanity. This belief could become powerful. It could hold people together. It could give the ship a new sacred purpose. The loss of Earth, or even the possibility of that loss, could transform ordinary maintenance into something almost heroic. The person repairing a water valve is not just fixing a system. The teacher explaining Earth history is not just giving a lesson. The doctor delivering a child is not just helping one family. They are all protecting the continuity of human life. But a purpose that large can also become dangerous if it hardens too much. If the ship believes it may be the last hope of humanity, then disagreement can start to look like betrayal. Resource debates can become moral battles. Personal choices can become public responsibilities. A society carrying that much symbolic weight may begin asking too much from its own people. For others, that pressure would feel crushing. To be told that your closed metal world may carry the last human future is not only inspiring, it is terrifying. A broken system is no longer just a maintenance problem. A political conflict is no longer local. A failed generation could mean the end of everything human. That is too much weight for any society to carry easily. And then there is the opposite fear. What if Earth is not gone, but changed into something the ship would no longer recognize? Centuries can transform a civilization. Governments change, languages change, values change. The people who launched the ship may be remembered on Earth as ancient history. That possibility would be strange, because it does not require catastrophe. Earth may still have children, cities, art, oceans, and bright nights full of communication between its own worlds. But the civilization that once promised to keep speaking to the ship may have become something else. The generation that cared may be gone. The institutions that maintained the link may have changed. The mission may have slipped from living duty into historical memory. From the ship's perspective, that would be almost impossible to accept. They are still paying the cost of the launch every day. Their lives are shaped by the mission every hour. But on Earth, the mission may have become old news, then tradition, then a quiet file inside an archive. So when Earth goes silent, one of the deepest fears may be this. Maybe nothing dramatic happened. Maybe we simply became too far away to matter. That is a cold thought. Not cinematic, just deeply human. Because being forgotten can feel like a kind of death. This fear would be especially painful for those born on the ship. They already live with the knowledge that Earth is a place they may never touch. Their connection to it depends on memory, education, archives, and messages. If the messages stop because Earth forgot them, then the emotional foundation of their identity becomes weaker. They are not returning citizens. They are not active representatives. They are descendants of a promise that may no longer be remembered by the people who made it. That could create anger in the younger generation. Why should they organize their lives around a planet that does not answer? Why should they preserve traditions from a world that may not preserve them? Why should the ship continue to define itself as Earth's mission if Earth no longer behaves like the mission matters? These questions would not appear all at once, but they would grow inside the silence. The ship would also fear internal consequences. If people believe Earth is gone, birth policies may change. Resource planning may change. Education may change. Some may demand more population growth to protect humanity's future. Others may demand stricter controls to preserve resources. Some may want to search for alternative targets. Others may insist that the original plan must remain sacred. Because the crew cannot control Earth's silence. They can only control what the silence does to them. That may be the most important early lesson. The first fears are unavoidable. A silent Earth will always invite dark possibilities. The crew cannot stop people from imagining war, collapse, abandonment, technological failure, or historical forgetting. But the ship can decide how those fears are handled. It can create transparency or secrecy. It can allow public grief or force denial. It can teach uncertainty carefully or let rumors educate people instead. A healthy ship would not demand emotional obedience. It would not tell people exactly what to feel. It would admit that the silence is frightening, and then build systems that keep fear from becoming the only voice on board. That is how a generation ship survives the first psychological wave. Not by eliminating fear, by preventing fear from becoming command. And this is where the story begins to shift. At first, the fears are about Earth, war, collapse, abandonment, technical failure, forgotten promises. But slowly, the fears turn inward. The question becomes not only what happened to the planet behind them, but what will happen to the society inside the ship if the silence continues. Can the ship keep functioning without Earth? Can the people on board maintain the systems, the culture, the mission, and the trust that keep a closed world alive? If Earth never answers again, the ship will need more than hope. It will need to prove that it was truly built to survive alone. Because after the first fear, after the rumors, after the debates about what may have happened to Earth, the ship would face a colder question. Can it keep working? Not as a symbol, not as an idea, but as a machine. A generation ship sounds like a dream when it is described from far away. A closed human world crossing the darkness between stars, carrying farms, families, schools, engines, archives, and a future. But inside the ship, survival would depend on thousands of ordinary systems doing their jobs every day. Pumps must move water, filters must remove waste, crops must grow, air must circulate. Earth going silent would not instantly destroy any of that. The lights would not go out just because the last message failed to arrive. The farms would not stop producing food because mission control no longer answers. The oxygen system would not know that Earth has become quiet. That is the strange practical truth. If the ship was designed properly, the loss of Earth's voice should not kill it immediately. A real generation ship would have to be built for long independence from the beginning. Even before Earth went silent, any urgent technical problem would have to be solved on board because a reply from Earth might take years. So in one sense, the ship should already be alone. But there is a difference between being designed for independence and emotionally discovering that independence is no longer theoretical. After Earth goes silent, all of that stops. The ship may still function, but it must think for itself. That change would be subtle at first. No one would call it independence on the first day. They would call it procedure, emergency protocol, or temporary local decision-making. But each time the ship solves a problem without Earth, the habit becomes stronger. The crew learns that the answer must come from inside the hull. The ship stops being only a vessel on a mission and becomes the place where all final decisions are made. The first major test would be life support. On Earth, life support is the entire planet. Oceans, forests, atmosphere, microbes, weather, sunlight, and vast, natural cycles humans did not design. On a generation ship, those cycles must be artificial, controlled, monitored, and repaired. The ship must recycle air, water, and nutrients with very little waste. If the communication system fails, people worry. If life support fails, people die. A ship that cannot breathe for itself is not a generation ship. It is a long coffin. That means the oxygen cycle would be one of the most protected systems on board. Whether it depends on plants, algae, chemical equipment, or several systems working together, the crew must understand it deeply. Children must grow up knowing that air is not free. Breath is something the ship makes. Food would be more complicated. A generation ship cannot simply store enough food for centuries and hope. It would need to grow food continuously. Crops, artificial lighting, soil or hydroponic systems, seed banks, nutrient cycles, and people trained to keep the system productive. Without Earth, the ship must rely on the biological world it brought with it. A failed harvest would not be a local problem. It would be a population problem. A crop disease would not be an inconvenience. It could become a threat to the future. This is why food on a generation ship would be treated almost like public infrastructure and almost like religion. The farms would not simply be rooms where plants grow. They would be the reason children can be born, the reason the crew can plan decades ahead, and the reason the ship can still believe in arrival. If Earth is silent, every successful harvest becomes proof that life on board is still possible without home. The ship would also need power. Power is the hidden heartbeat of everything. Lights, pumps, computers, medical tools, climate control, recycling, farming, navigation, and manufacturing all depend on it. Without power, the ship becomes a cold object full of trapped people. A generation ship might use nuclear reactors, fusion systems, advanced batteries, or other long-lived energy sources. Whatever the technology is, it must last longer than individual lives. Earth's silence would make power planning more serious. No new fuel shipment is coming, no outside repair team is coming, no updated reactor design is coming from home. The ship has what it has. And then there are spare parts. This may sound less dramatic than oxygen or food, but it may be one of the true limits of a generation ship. Machines break, pumps wear down, filters clog, sensors drift, seals crack. Even the most advanced ship slowly becomes older every day. If Earth is silent, the ship must be able to produce, repair, recycle, and redesign parts by itself. The ship cannot only carry parts, it must carry the ability to make parts. That is much harder than it sounds. Making a part is not only about having a machine that can shape metal or print material. It requires measurements, standards, testing, quality control, skilled workers, and the ability to understand why the old part failed. A badly made replacement can be worse than no replacement at all. It can give people confidence for a few weeks and then fail at the worst possible moment. This means technical knowledge becomes a survival resource, not just data in archives. Living knowledge. Earth's silence makes education more important, not less. The ship cannot call home for expertise. It must grow expertise inside itself. This would make classrooms part of the survival system. A child learning mathematics is not only preparing for a career, they may be preserving the future ability to repair a reactor, design a filter, diagnose a disease, or understand the ship's ecology. Education would not be decoration. It would be one of the invisible engines of the ship. Medical survival would be another test. On Earth, medicine is supported by hospitals, research labs, supply chains, specialists, and constant new discoveries. On a generation ship, medicine becomes narrower and more fragile. The ship must handle injuries, childbirth, infections, genetic problems, mental health, aging, surgery, and emergencies. With limited resources, the population itself becomes part of survival. A generation ship must maintain enough people to operate the systems, but not so many that resources collapse. Too few children, and the ship may not have enough workers or experts in the future. Too many, and food, water, space, and energy become strained. Earth going silent would make this question heavier, because the ship may feel like a branch of humanity that must not fail. That pressure could change birth policies. Some may want more children to preserve the future. Others may want stricter limits to protect resources. Both sides could claim survival, and both could be partly right. In the best case, the ship was built with this possibility in mind. The designers knew that Earth might go silent one day. They knew communication could fail, so they built backup systems, decentralized knowledge, strong education, local governance, emergency protocols, and a culture trained to survive uncertainty. In that best case, Earth's silence hurts deeply, but the ship continues. People grieve, they argue, they investigate. But the oxygen stays stable, the water remains clean, the farms keep producing, the power systems hold, repairs continue, children keep learning. The ship slowly changes from a mission supported by Earth into a world responsible for itself. Earth's silence would expose every hidden dependency. The ship might look self-sufficient for decades while quietly relying on Earth in ways people did not fully appreciate. Advice, data, scientific updates, cultural legitimacy, and a backup source of authority. The silence would reveal whether independence was real or only assumed. A generation ship cannot discover too late that it was never truly independent, because there is no rescue waiting nearby. This is where the silence becomes governance. Before, Earth's messages may have provided guidance, authority, or at least perspective. After silence, the ship's leadership must carry the full burden. There is no higher command, no mission control to consult. The ship's society must become adult in a new way. It must stop asking only, "What would Earth tell us to do?" and start asking, "What must we do to survive?" That does not mean forgetting Earth. It means Earth can no longer be the only source of direction. The ship may still preserve Earth's laws, languages, science, and memory. It may still teach children about oceans and forests. But survival now depends on decisions made inside the hull. The ship becomes the center, not because it wants to replace Earth, but because Earth is no longer answering. The generation ship is becoming its own world. And worlds need more than machinery. They need rules people accept, records people trust, and institutions that survive leadership changes. If every crisis depends on one brilliant engineer or one respected commander, the ship is fragile. The deeper form of survival is building systems that keep working after those people are gone. This may be the real answer to whether it can keep functioning. Technically, yes, if it was built with enough redundancy, repair capacity, education, energy, ecological stability, medical knowledge, and social trust. But that answer is fragile. The ship survives because people keep understanding, repairing, respecting, and governing its machines. Without Earth, everything local becomes final. So the ship must become careful in a deeper way than before. It must treat knowledge like oxygen. It must treat trust like power. It must treat food, water, and education as parts of the same life support system. It must understand that surviving after Earth goes silent is not just about keeping the engines running. That may be the quietest truth of all. The ship's most important life support system may not be a machine. It may be continuity, the ability to pass skills, discipline, memory, and cooperation from one generation to the next, without letting fear or comfort weaken them. If that continuity breaks, the ship can decay even while its lights are still on. It is about keeping civilization coherent inside a closed metal world. And this is where the next problem begins. Because even if the ship keeps functioning, even if the air stays breathable, the farms keep growing, the reactors keep producing power, and the workshops keep repairing the machinery, the people on board still have to live with what the silence means. A machine can continue after Earth goes silent. But can a society? That is the harder question. Because once the ship proves it can survive technically, the people inside must face something deeper than maintenance. They must decide who they are when home no longer answers. That is where the deepest change begins. Before the silence, the people on board could describe themselves in a simple way. Even if they were born long after launch, even if Earth was already a place of archives and delayed messages, there was still a living thread behind them. The ship had an origin that was still speaking. That thread helped answer difficult questions. Why are we here? Why do we live inside a ship? Why can we not choose a normal life under an open sky? Why must our children inherit this journey? When Earth stops answering, those answers begin to weaken. A generation ship requires enormous sacrifice from people who did not choose to be born there. Every generation inherits limited space, limited resources, strict maintenance, recycled air, artificial light, and a destination they may never personally reach. Those limits can be accepted if society believes they serve a meaningful future. But when the voice of Earth disappears, the ship must create that meaning for itself. This is where identity begins to shift. Home is something that can answer. Origin is something you came from. Memory is something you carry because it is no longer present. A generation ship after Earth goes silent may slowly move through all three stages, even if no one announces it. That transition would not happen in speeches first. It would happen in small language changes. A teacher might stop saying, "When Earth replies," and start saying, "If Earth replies." A child might draw the ship larger than Earth. A memorial might honor the last message not as a recent event, but as something from the old age. The society would feel itself changing before it fully admits that it has changed. A child might ask, "Are we from Earth?" An adult might answer, "Yes." But the child may ask again, "Then why does Earth not talk to us?" And suddenly the answer becomes harder. Adults can explain distance, signal delays, and uncertainty. But if years pass and no message returns, explanation begins to sound like tradition. The child grows up knowing Earth as images, recordings, lessons, and silence. To that child, the ship is not a mission away from home. The ship is the only world they have ever known. That does not mean they will hate Earth. They may still love it. But their love will be different from the love of those who remember Earth's voice. The older generation may hear silence as loss. The younger generation may hear silence as normal. The older generation may preserve Earth rituals because they remember when those rituals were connected to new messages. The younger generation may ask why those rituals still control the present. Neither side has to be wrong. They are living in different emotional timelines. Because once Earth no longer answers, there is no outside parent civilization. There is no final court of appeal. There is no mission control to settle disputes. The ship must govern itself, not as a temporary crew, but as a civilization. This would change politics. Before the silence, ship leadership might have derived legitimacy from the mission charter, Earth authorities, and the original plan. After the silence, those documents still exist, but their living authority fades. A law written before launch may still matter, but what happens when conditions change? What happens when the ship must make choices the original planners never imagined? Are we preserving Earth's mission, or are we becoming something new? If people believe leaders are hiding information, every official statement becomes suspicious. If people believe reformers are betraying the old mission, every proposal becomes dangerous. If people believe the archive is being edited, memory itself becomes political. On Earth, mistrust can divide nations. On a generation ship, mistrust can threaten the shared systems everyone needs to stay alive. A ship after Earth goes silent would need transparent procedures more than heroic speeches. It would need public access to data, clear explanations of uncertainty, and leaders willing to say when they do not know. The worst thing leadership could do is pretend certainty exists where it does not. The silence is already frightening. False certainty would make it worse when it breaks. The ship's soil, water, seeds, languages, bodies, music, and memories all came from Earth. Every person on board is a descendant of that world. If that world stops speaking, the absence touches the deepest layer of identity. This is why Earth might become more powerful after it goes silent, not less. A living Earth can be argued with. It can send confusing messages, change policies, disappoint people, and behave like a real civilization. A silent Earth becomes easier to idealize. People can turn it into a perfect lost home, a sacred origin, or the opposite, a failed world, a parent that abandoned its children, a warning of what the ship must not become. Both versions can grow because neither can be corrected by new messages. The archive would contain more than history. It would contain voices, landscapes, languages, music, laws, science, arguments, disasters, beauty, and shame. It would show Earth as a real place, not just a symbol. That may be essential. If the ship turns Earth into a perfect myth, the present will always feel like a lesser life. If it turns Earth into a failure, the past becomes something to reject. The archive has to preserve Earth honestly enough that future generations can inherit it without being trapped by it. This is why education becomes so delicate. Children born after the silence must learn Earth's story without being crushed by it. If they are taught only that Earth was paradise, the ship may feel like a prison. If they are taught only that Earth failed, they may reject the past too completely. If they are taught that Earth may return any day, they may grow up waiting for a voice that never comes. The truth is more difficult. Earth was real. Earth was beautiful. Earth was flawed. Earth sent the ship. Earth has gone silent, and we do not know why. That may be the most honest curriculum, but honesty does not remove pain. It would teach that disagreement must never threaten the systems that keep everyone alive. It would create laws that protect critical infrastructure from politics. It would make maintenance a shared cultural value, not just a job for engineers. Whatever people believe about Earth, they still owe the ship care. A child born long after the silence may one day stand in an observation room, looking at unfamiliar stars, and feel no memory of Earth's voice. They may know Earth through lessons, recordings, oceans on screens, and stories from older people. But their deepest sense of home may be the hum of the ship, the smell of the farms, and the people around them. That may be one of the hardest truths for the older generation to accept. To them, calling the ship home may feel like surrender. It may sound like admitting that Earth is gone, or that the mission has replaced the planet that gave it life. But for the young, refusing to call the ship home may feel cruel. They need a world they are allowed to belong to. They cannot spend their entire lives being told that their real home is a silent planet they have never touched. A healthy society would need room for both feelings. Earth can be home in memory, the ship can be home in life. One does not have to erase the other. But balancing those two homes may become one of the central emotional tasks of the civilization on board. That realization would be painful for those who still think of Earth as the only true home, but it may also be necessary. A society cannot survive forever by defining itself only through absence. If Earth is silent long enough, the ship must become more than a wound. Earth's silence forces the generation ship toward that transformation. And once people begin to see themselves that way, the next question becomes unavoidable. If the ship is now its own world, who decides where that world should go? Because continuing the original course may no longer feel automatic. The destination was chosen by Earth. The mission was planned by people who may be gone. The data may be old. The assumptions may be outdated. The ship may still be capable of reaching the target, but the society inside it has changed. So the silence does not only ask who they are, it asks what they should do next. Should they continue toward the original star, because that is the promise they inherited? Should they turn back toward Earth, even if the journey might take generations, and the planet may no longer be waiting? Should they stop somewhere else, search for another target, conserve resources, or accept the ship itself as permanent home? These questions begin as whispers. Then they become debates. Then they become the future. Because once home no longer answers, the path ahead is no longer just a route through space. It becomes a choice. And choices are what turn a mission into a civilization. A crew follows a plan. A civilization debates one. The ship may still be moving through the same darkness, toward the same point of light. But after Earth goes silent, the people on board are no longer only carrying out instructions. They are deciding what those instructions still mean. That is why the next question becomes unavoidable. Not whether the ship can breathe, not whether the farms can grow, not whether the machines can be repaired, But whether the society inside the ship should keep going the way Earth intended, turn back toward the silent planet behind them, or admit that the ship itself has become the only home they truly have. That is the choice Earth's silence would eventually force. At first, the question might feel too dangerous to ask openly. The ship is still on course. The engines still follow the old plan. The navigation systems still point toward the destination chosen long before many people on board were born. The mission files may still say that this is where the ship must go, but silence changes the weight of every plan. Before Earth went quiet, continuing forward was obedience to a living mission. After Earth goes silent, continuing forward becomes a decision the ship must make for itself. The course may be the same, but the meaning is different. A path chosen by Earth becomes a path chosen again by the people on board. The first option would be to continue. Keep going. Do not turn back. Do not stop. Do not let uncertainty break the mission. That sentence would sound strong, and for many people on board, it would be necessary. A generation ship cannot survive if every shock turns into a total rethinking of its purpose. If the society changes direction every time fear rises, then the ship becomes unstable. The original plan may be old, but it may also be the strongest structure the people have left. This would probably be the official position at first, because it is the safest one politically and technically. The ship was built for a destination. Its resources, engines, population plans, and maintenance may all be designed around reaching that target. If Earth collapsed, then continuing may be the most important thing the ship can do. If the generation ship is one of the last surviving human branches, then turning back toward a dead or broken planet may be a waste of centuries. The destination ahead may be the only chance to make human life more secure. But continuing is not simple. The original mission was built on assumptions. Maybe Earth would keep sending updates. Maybe new observations of the destination would arrive over time. Maybe better course corrections would be transmitted later. If Earth is silent, the mission may still be possible, but it is no longer supported by the same living stream of information. The ship would have to ask whether the old destination is still the best destination. This question would not mean the mission has failed. It would mean the ship has become responsible for its own judgment. Earth chose the destination with the knowledge it had. The ship must now decide whether that choice still holds with the knowledge it has. That is a lonely responsibility, because there may be no one behind them to confirm the answer. The second option would be to turn back. This option would probably begin quietly, not as an official proposal, but as a feeling. Someone might say it in a corridor. Someone might write it in a private journal. Someone might ask whether the engines could reverse the mission if they had to. At first, the idea might sound impossible. Then, as the silence grows, it might begin to sound less like panic and more like one of the futures the ship has to consider. For many people, this would be emotional before it is practical. Earth is silent, and the human instinct is to return to the place where the silence began. A generation ship might be filled with people who have never seen Earth, but the idea of turning back could still feel powerful. It would not only be a course change, it would be a search for truth. But turning back across interstellar distance may be almost impossible in practice. The ship has already spent years, decades, or centuries moving away. Slowing down, turning, and accelerating back could consume enormous resources. The journey home might take longer than continuing to the destination. Turning back might not mean returning to home. It might mean traveling toward an unknown future version of Earth. A planet that went silent centuries ago may not be waiting with answers. It may be dead. It may be recovering. It may be inhabited by a civilization that no longer recognizes the ship. A return journey could end with the ship arriving at the ruins of a world it spent generations trying to reach. That possibility would divide people. Some would say they must know. Others would say, knowing is not worth the cost. Is it fair to redirect future generations toward a silent planet just because the present generation cannot endure not knowing? But the opposite question is just as hard. Is it fair to force future generations away from Earth if Earth might still be alive? No option escapes responsibility. That is what makes the choice so heavy. Every possible path can be defended as moral. Continue, and you protect the future ahead. Turn back, and you honor the origin behind you. Slow down, and you protect the lives already inside the ship. None of these instincts is foolish. The problem is that they cannot all fully win at the same time. It would mean accepting the ship as the primary habitat, perhaps indefinitely. The mission would become less about reaching a planet quickly and more about preserving a civilization inside the vessel. The destination ahead would still exist. An Earth behind would still exist or not exist. But the ship would stop treating either one as the only source of meaning. But this also has dangers. A generation ship may be self-sustaining, but not infinite. Parts wear down. Ecosystems drift. Social systems change. Fuel may be consumed. The ship may need a destination because ships are not planets. Accepting the ship as permanent home could be realistic for a time, but dangerous if it becomes an excuse to avoid hard decisions. This would be the central tension. Continue forward, and the ship honors the original mission but risks trusting old assumptions. Turn back, and it seeks Earth but may sacrifice the future for a truth it may never reach. Stop or slow down, and it protects the present but risks becoming trapped in hesitation. Each option has hope inside it. Each option has fear inside it. That is why the decision would not be purely technical. Engineers could calculate fuel, travel time, system lifespan, and risk. Astronomers could update target predictions. Doctors could estimate population stability. But no equation can decide what a society should value most. The ship would need politics. It would need public debate. It would need procedures people trust. It would need to decide whether the living generation has the right to change the path of unborn generations. The ship's society would need to ask, who gets to decide? The current adults? A council of experts? All citizens? Should the original mission charter have legal authority? Should Earth's last instructions still matter? Should silence cancel old obligations? A ship in motion cannot avoid choosing. Even doing nothing has a direction. That realization may push society toward a deeper honesty. The question is not whether they can avoid responsibility. They cannot. The question is whether they can accept responsibility consciously. If they continue, they must say why. If they turn back, they must say why. If they slow down, they must say why. Before Earth went silent, the mission's meaning flowed backward from Earth and forward toward the destination. After the silence, meaning has to be made inside the ship. The people on board can still honor Earth, mourn it, wait for it, and preserve it. But they cannot let the absence of Earth prevent all future decisions. They have to become the kind of civilization that can choose without permission. Every path reveals what the ship values. Forward means future. Back means origin. Stillness means survival. And none of those values can be thrown away. A civilization without a future becomes a memorial. A civilization without an origin becomes hollow. A civilization without survival becomes only an idea. The ship needs all three. The memory of where it came from, the protection of the people alive now, and the courage to keep creating a future beyond the silence. The ship cannot be only a monument to Earth. It cannot be only a machine heading blindly toward a star. It cannot be only a closed habitat, afraid to choose. It has to become a living civilization that carries its origin, protects its present, and still makes a future. If it can do that, then Earth's silence does not end the mission. It transforms it. This transformation may be slow enough that no one notices the exact moment it happens. One generation still says they are continuing Earth's mission. The next says they are continuing the ship's mission. Another says they are continuing humanity's mission. The destination may not change at all, but the ownership of the journey changes completely. And once that happens, Earth begins to change inside the minds of the people on board. The longer it remains silent, the less it behaves like a current place, and the more it becomes a story. Not because it was never real, but because no new reality arrives. The last messages remain. The old images remain. The oceans, cities, forests, voices, animals and storms remain in the archive. But no living correction comes. No new memory replaces the old one. No fresh voice says, "This is Earth now." So, generation by generation, the silent planet behind them begins to drift from home into legend. And that may be the next transformation. When Earth is no longer a place anyone on board remembers hearing from. When it becomes something older, softer, stranger, and more powerful. Not a destination, not a government, not a voice. A myth. That is what Earth may become when the silence lasts long enough. Not because Earth was never real, not because the oceans, forests, cities, storms, animals, and people in the archives were invented. Earth was real. Earth was the beginning of every life on board, even for people born centuries after the ship left. The water in their bodies, the seeds in their farms, the languages in their classrooms, and the stories in their memories all came from that one planet. But reality changes when nothing new arrives. A place can be real and still become unreachable. A place can be remembered and still become myth. For the first generations after Earth goes silent, the planet would still feel recent. Some people may remember hearing the last messages when they were young. Others may have parents who heard them. The silence would still feel like an event, something that happened during living memory. People would still speak about Earth as if it might answer again. They would still imagine that one day a new voice might break through the dark. But time would keep moving. Children would be born who never heard a new message from Earth. Then their children would be born. Then their grandchildren. At some point, no living person on board would remember the sound of Earth arriving as news. No one would remember gathering for a fresh transmission. The last message would no longer belong to personal memory. It would belong to history. That is when Earth begins to change. The same images would remain. The blue planet, the white clouds, the green forests, the night cities glowing along coastlines, the waves moving under sunlight, the sound of rain, the sound of wind. But without new messages, those images would stop aging. Earth in the archive would become permanently fixed. It would always be the Earth of the last records. If the final messages showed cities, then the cities remain forever in that form. If the final recording showed oceans, then the oceans never change. If the final voice from Earth was calm, some may believe Earth was calm at the end. If it sounded worried, others may build theories around that worry. The archive freezes the planet at one moment, while the real Earth, if it still exists, continues changing beyond the ship's knowledge. This is how myth begins. Not with lies, with missing updates. A living world constantly corrects the stories told about it. It disappoints people, it changes, it produces new evidence. It refuses to stay simple. But a silent world cannot correct anyone. It cannot say, "That is not what happened." It cannot say, "We survived." It cannot say, "We changed." It cannot send new images, new voices, new arguments, or new proof. So people on board begin to fill the silence. Some will remember Earth as paradise. They will speak of open skies, natural gravity, oceans, sunlight through trees, birds over water, and air that did not need machines. To them, Earth will become the lost garden, the true home, the place humans were made for. The ship may be necessary, but Earth is sacred. Others will remember Earth as failure. They will point to the wars, collapses, pollution, disasters and mistakes inside the archive. They will say Earth was beautiful, but it was also the world that became silent. To them, Earth is not a paradise. It is a warning. Both versions may use the same archive. Both versions may quote the same histories. Both versions may show the same images. That is what makes myth powerful. It is not always created from fiction. Sometimes it is created by selecting which parts of the truth matter most. A blue ocean can mean home. A ruined city can mean failure. A record of war can mean danger. The archive contains all of it, but people choose the meaning they need. On a generation ship, that choice would shape culture. Earth festivals might continue long after the last signal. People may gather every year to remember the final transmission. They may play old music, show images of forests, and tell children what rain sounded like. For some, this would be gratitude. For others, it might feel like worshipping a dead world. This could divide society, but it could also give people meaning. A generation ship needs stories. People cannot live on engineering alone. They need origin stories, holidays, warnings, heroes, mistakes, songs, and symbols. If Earth becomes myth, that is not automatically bad. Myths help people carry truth when facts alone feel too cold. The danger is when myth replaces reality completely. If Earth becomes only paradise, then the ship may never feel like a worthy home. People may spend their lives longing for a world they do not understand, a world that may not exist anymore, and may never have been as perfect as the stories say. The ship becomes a prison compared to an imagined Earth. If Earth becomes only failure, then the ship may cut itself off from its own origin. People may reject the past too completely. They may forget that the ship exists because Earth had enough courage, intelligence, and hope to build it. They may remember only Earth's mistakes, not its beauty or its achievement. The healthiest society would have to hold a harder truth. Earth was not one thing. It was home and danger, beauty and violence, origin and warning, gift and failure. It was the planet that created humans, and perhaps the planet that could no longer speak to them. That complexity would be difficult to teach, but necessary. A generation ship that turns Earth into a simple legend may damage itself. The people on board must be allowed to love Earth without pretending it was perfect. They must be allowed to criticize Earth without pretending it was worthless. The archive would become central to this struggle. At first, the archive is a library. Later, it becomes the closest thing to Earth itself. If no new signal arrives, the archive is the planet's remaining voice. It contains the last images, the last histories, the last scientific records, the last languages, the last art, and the last messages from families. Whoever controls the archive controls how Earth is remembered. That would make archive access one of the most important political issues on board. Should everything be open to everyone? Should dangerous records be restricted? Should children see Earth's wars as well as its forests? Should the final messages be played in full, even if they are painful? None of these questions is simple. An open archive protects against manipulation, but it can overwhelm people. A controlled archive can protect children, but it can also create suspicion. A simplified archive helps education, but it can become propaganda. A complete archive preserves truth, but truth can be heavy inside a closed world. The ship would need archivists, who are not only technicians, but guardians of memory. Their job would not be to make Earth look good or bad. Their job would be to keep Earth real, to preserve contradictions, to remind future generations that the planet behind them was not a symbol first. It was a living world. But even the best archive cannot replace contact. That is the tragedy. A recording of rain is not rain. A video of an ocean is not the ocean. A map of a forest is not the smell of wet soil. A voice from Earth is not the same as Earth answering now. The walls may show images of beaches, deserts, mountains, and clouds. Classrooms may teach the names of countries, rivers, species, and stars as seen from Earth's sky. Children may know what thunder sounded like before they understand why adults lower their voices when they speak about the last signal. For them, Earth becomes both intimate and impossible. At the same time, the ship itself would develop its own culture, its own jokes, its own accents, its own holidays, its own architecture of memory. People may celebrate successful harvests more intensely than old Earth festivals. They may honor engineers, farmers, doctors, teachers, and navigators as founders of the living world. The more the ship becomes culturally alive, the more Earth becomes ancient. That does not mean Earth is forgotten. It means Earth changes position. It moves from current authority to ancestral source. This is a major turning point. A society can respect an ancestor without obeying it forever. It can preserve an origin without trying to become it again. It can say, "We came from Earth," without saying, "We must remain Earth in miniature." That may be the emotional freedom the ship needs. Because if Earth remains the only true home forever, then everyone born on board is living in exile. But if the ship becomes a legitimate home too, then life on board can become more than waiting. People can belong to the vessel without betraying the planet. They can love Earth as origin and love the ship as reality. But the opposite danger is also real. If the ship teaches every generation that real life exists only somewhere else, then people may never fully value the life they actually have. They may maintain the ship only as a hallway between a lost Earth and a future planet, not as a world filled with human beings whose lives matter now. The balance is delicate. Remember Earth, seek the future, but live on board. That may become the central philosophy after Earth becomes myth. It would teach children that Earth was the beginning, not the only place humanity can belong. It would teach that the ship is home, but not the final horizon. It would teach that the destination matters, but the journey is not empty time. Earth may become a myth, but the ship is real, the farms are real, the air is real, the children are real, the decisions ahead are real. And somewhere inside the ship, deeper than engines and archives, the society must understand that the past is not enough to keep a civilization alive. It must know what came before, but it must also choose what to carry forward. That is why the archive becomes more important than ever. Because when Earth becomes myth, the archive is the only thing standing between memory and distortion. It is the place where humanity's past can remain complicated, alive, and honest. And if the ship is going to survive the silence for centuries, it will need that honesty, not just to remember Earth, but to remember what it means to be human. That may be the real purpose of the archive, after Earth goes silent. At first, the archive may look like a storage system, a place for records, images, scientific papers, languages, art, maps, medical knowledge, engineering manuals, music, laws, and personal messages. But after Earth stops answering, the archive becomes something much larger. It becomes the closest thing the ship has to a living Earth. Not alive in the way a planet is alive. Not changing, not growing forests, not sending new weather, not creating new cities, not speaking in real time. But still, carrying the voice of the world that made them. A generation ship without an archive would be terrifying. It might still have engines, farms, water, and air. But without memory, it would slowly become detached from its own beginning. Children would know they were human, but not fully what humanity had been. The archive prevents that. It says, "Before these corridors, there were oceans. Before artificial gravity, there was a planet pulling everybody gently toward its surface. Before recycled air, there were forests, winds, storms, and skies. Before the ship, there was Earth." That memory would matter because survival alone is not enough. A machine can keep bodies alive, but a civilization needs continuity. It needs to know what came before, what was lost, what was learned, and what hopes were strong enough to launch a world into deep space. The archive is not only history, it is instruction. It is warning. It is identity. If Earth never answers again, the people on board may realize that the archive is one of the ship's most important life support systems. Not because it makes oxygen or food, but because it helps make meaning. It reminds them that they are part of a story much older than the hull around them. But keeping an archive alive for centuries would be harder than it sounds. The ship might keep every file, every recording, every image, and every document, yet slowly lose the ability to understand them. So the archive cannot simply be stored. It must be taught. If the archive is only beautiful, it lies. If it is only tragic, it wounds. If it is only technical, it becomes cold. If it is only emotional, it becomes unstable. The archive must be complete enough to hold contradiction. This is what makes the archive difficult. People do not only want truth, they want truth shaped into something they can live with. After centuries of silence, many will want Earth to become simple. A paradise, a failure, a sacred origin, or a warning. But the archive must resist that simplification. It must keep the uncomfortable details alive, because a simple Earth would teach a simple lesson, and simple lessons can become dangerous inside a closed world. Earth was not simple, and the archive must not make it simple. It must preserve the music and the violence, the discoveries and the mistakes, the kindness and the cruelty, the oceans and the smoke, the medicine and the weapons, the art and the disasters. It must let future generations see that humanity was never one clean story. It was a species capable of building a generation ship, and also a species that may have gone silent. That contradiction is painful. But without it, the ship may learn the wrong lesson. The archive must teach humility, not hopelessness. Humility, in that sense, the archive is a mirror. The ship looks into it and sees Earth, but it also sees itself. A manual about ecosystem collapse is not only about Earth, it is about the farms. A history of political breakdown is not only about old nations, it is about the ship's councils. A story about lost languages is not only cultural history, it is a warning that memory can disappear quietly. In this way, old Earth records would become practical tools. The ship would study past famines not because anyone on board has seen a continent, but because food systems can fail. It would study old pandemics not because it lives under an open sky, but because disease can still move through enclosed spaces. It would study propaganda, censorship, and collapsed governments because a generation ship is small enough for fear to spread quickly and fragile enough that bad leadership can become life-threatening. For people born inside the ship, these small records might be the most powerful. A technical archive can teach how to survive. A human archive can teach why survival matters. That difference would be felt most clearly by the young. A child might understand how oxygen is recycled and still wonder why the ship must keep going. A child might know the maintenance schedule and still feel trapped by the mission. But a record of ordinary human life from Earth can make the past feel personal. It can show that humanity was not only a species trying to survive, it was a species that loved, played, grieved, created, and searched for meaning. That variety may protect the future, but the archive could also become dangerous if used badly. A generation ship cannot afford a single official memory that no one is allowed to question. Because if the official memory is wrong, the whole society may inherit the mistake. The archive must remain open enough to breathe. This would require trust. The ship cannot treat the archive like a dangerous object that only leaders may touch. If people believe Earth's memory is being hidden from them, the archive will become a source of suspicion instead of stability. But the ship also cannot throw every record into public life without explanation. Memory needs access, but it also needs context. A painful truth without context can wound. A protected truth without access can become a lie. There is another problem too. The archive might be too large. A society can forget inside abundance. So the ship must decide how memory is organized, not just what is kept, how it is found, how it is taught, how it is questioned, how it is protected from becoming either chaos or propaganda. Those decisions may shape the ship for centuries. A search system that always shows heroic records first will create one kind of culture. A curriculum that begins with disaster will create another. A museum that displays only Earth's beauty may create longing. A museum that displays only Earth's failures may create rejection. The archive does not speak neutrally by itself. It speaks through the paths people build through it. But if the archive becomes too weak, the ship may drift into amnesia. It may repeat old mistakes because it no longer recognizes them. It may lose languages, sciences, stories, and warnings. It may become efficient but shallow, alive but rootless. The archive must feed growth, not prevent it. That may be one of the hardest balances to maintain. The ship needs roots, but roots are not meant to become chains. Earth's past should guide the people on board, not freeze them. If the archive becomes too sacred to question, the ship may stop adapting. But if it becomes too ordinary to respect, the ship may forget why it exists. The healthiest relationship may be neither worship nor rejection, but inheritance. That possibility is enormous. The ship may not only preserve human culture, it may preserve Earth life. This would make some rooms of the ship feel almost impossible in their importance. A vault of seeds would not just be agricultural storage. It would be a quiet forest waiting for a world. A genetic library would not just be data. It would be the possibility that parts of Earth's living web could one day be restored under another sun. Even if no animal or tree inside the archive is alive in the familiar sense, each record would carry a kind of future life. That limitation would be humbling. The archive can preserve memory. It cannot fully preserve the world. The archive becomes a bridge between loss and possibility, and that bridge must be protected. Yet, protection cannot mean hiding it away from the civilization it is meant to serve. A seed that is never planted remains only potential. A language that is never spoken becomes a pattern in storage. A song that is never heard becomes silent even if the file survives. The archive must be preserved, but it must also be used carefully, because memory kept completely untouched can become another form of forgetting. A generation that is angry at Earth should not be allowed to erase its beauty. A generation that worships Earth should not be allowed to erase its failures. A generation focused on survival should not be allowed to erase art. A generation focused on comfort should not be allowed to erase warnings. The archive must outlast moods. It must outlast politics. It must outlast grief. That may be what Earth can still give even in silence. It cannot answer, guide in real time, repair the ship, or confirm the path. But through the archive, Earth can still teach. The question is whether the ship can keep listening without becoming trapped. That would be a quiet failure. Not extinction, but amnesia. And for a generation ship, amnesia may be one of the closest things to death without dying. So the archive must endure. Through power shortages, through political conflict, through language change, through grief, through the temptation to simplify the past, and the temptation to forget it. And if Earth has remained silent for centuries, that story may have no other living branch. That thought changes everything. Because the archive is no longer only about memory. It becomes responsibility. If the generation ship is one branch of humanity, then the archive is what keeps that branch connected to the root. But if the ship is the last branch, then the archive may be the last full memory of an entire species' birthplace. No one on board could know this with certainty. Earth may still exist. Other colonies may exist. Other ships may be traveling between stars. But if the silence lasts long enough, the possibility can never fully leave them. The archive may be one copy among many, or it may be the final library of humanity. The ship must behave carefully enough for the second possibility, even if it hopes for the first. At that point, losing the archive would not only mean forgetting Earth, it would mean the universe forgetting that Earth ever spoke. And once the crew understands that possibility, the final question becomes heavier than survival, heavier than direction, and heavier than silence itself. If they are truly alone, what exactly must they carry forward? Not only to stay alive, but to make sure humanity remains human. That may be the final burden of a generation ship after Earth goes silent. By this point, the question is no longer only whether the ship can survive. It has already passed through the first missed signals, the first fear, the first technical investigations, the first political arguments, and the first generations who begin to see Earth less as a living voice and more as an origin. The ship has kept breathing. The farms have kept growing. The water has kept cycling. Children have still been born into corridors. Artificial light, recycled air, and the soft mechanical hum of a world moving between stars. But survival is not the same as continuation. A closed human world can keep bodies alive and still lose something essential. It can become efficient, but empty. It can become stable but afraid. It can preserve the shape of civilization while slowly forgetting the spirit that made civilization worth saving. If the ship is truly alone, then its greatest danger may not be that the machines fail. It may be that humanity becomes smaller. That is why the last branch of humanity, if that is what the ship has become, must carry more than people. It must carry memory, knowledge, kindness, doubt, curiosity, discipline, art, grief, and the ability to change without destroying itself. It must carry the things that make humans more than a biological species moving through space. Because if the ship becomes the final branch, then every ordinary thing becomes heavier. A school is no longer only a school. It is where humanity teaches itself to continue. A farm is no longer only a farm. It is where Earth's life is translated into shipboard survival. A repair shop is no longer only a repair shop. It is where the future is defended against decay. An archive is no longer only an archive. It is where the dead still speak. And a child is no longer only one child. That child may be part of the only human future left. A generation ship cannot become only a monument to emergency. It has to become a place where life is allowed to be life. People must still celebrate birthdays, make music, fall in love, argue about small things, invent games, and tell stories that are not only about Earth or survival. If every moment becomes duty, then humanity may continue biologically while losing the ordinary warmth that made it worth protecting in the first place. If the ship is the last branch of humanity, then humanity must remain worth preserving. That means the ship must protect more than systems. It must protect human dignity. So the last branch of humanity would need laws that protect people even when fear is strong. It would need limits on power. It would need ways to challenge leaders. It would need education that teaches people not only how to obey procedures, but how to think. It would need room for disagreement, because a society that cannot disagree cannot correct itself. That ability to correct itself may be the most human survival tool of all. A closed world must be honest, faster than an open one. That honesty would have to become cultural, not only technical. It would need to appear in classrooms, councils, medical rooms, farms, and maintenance decks. People would have to learn that admitting a weakness early is not shameful. It is survival. A crack reported quickly can be repaired. A mistake hidden out of pride can become history. This is why humility matters. The ship must carry curiosity too. Curiosity is not a luxury in deep space. It is how a civilization avoids becoming a loop of repeated habits. The people on board must keep looking outward, not because the stars will comfort them, but because reality is larger than the ship's fear. A society that only studies its own survival may forget that the universe still exists beyond the walls. A generation ship that stops being curious may survive for a time, but it will slowly become smaller. The ship must also carry compassion. A survival plan can be logical and still become cruel. It can reduce people to functions, measuring them only by usefulness. But a child who struggles, an elder who can no longer work, a grieving person, an artist, or someone who asks uncomfortable questions is still part of the human world. If the last branch of humanity trims away everything inefficient, then it may survive by becoming less human. If the last branch of humanity begins trimming away everything that looks inefficient, then it may survive by becoming less human. That is a terrible bargain, because loneliness may be one of the deepest dangers. Not physical loneliness, because the ship may be crowded. Historical loneliness. The feeling that no one beyond the hull remembers them. The feeling that the universe is full of stars, but no familiar voice will ever answer. This is how civilization continues. Not only through engines, through response. A child asks if humanity is alone, and someone answers. A grieving person speaks, and someone listens. A system fails, and people gather to repair it. A generation doubts the mission, and another does not silence them, but talks with them. Earth may have stopped answering, but the ship must not let silence become its own internal language. That includes the voices of future generations. Every generation on board is both temporary and essential. None of them owns the ship completely. They inherit it from people who are gone, use it for a while, change it whether they mean to or not, and then pass it forward. That chain is fragile. It can be broken by selfishness, fear, neglect, or the belief that the present has the right to spend what the future will need. That chain may become the new definition of humanity on board. Not a single heroic crew, not one final survivor, not one dramatic last stand. Humanity becomes the long act of passing life forward without fully knowing who will receive it. Earth did that when it launched the ship. The first crew did that for the generations after them. Now, the silent ship must do it for children who may one day stand under another sky. And maybe, centuries later, the ship reaches its destination. It arrives carrying people whose ancestors never heard Earth speak, people who know the planet mostly through archives and ceremonies, people who may love the ship as deeply as older generations loved home. They do not arrive as the same civilization that launched from Earth. They arrive as descendants of Earth, changed by the crossing. If there is a world there, everything begins again. The first open sky may feel impossible. Weather may feel alive in a way no simulation ever fully captured. The first step outside may not feel like returning to normal life. It may feel like entering a myth from the other side. It arrives carrying people whose ancestors never heard Earth speak. People who know the planet mostly through archives and ceremonies. People who may love the ship as deeply as older generations loved home. They arrive not as visitors from Earth exactly, but as descendants of Earth, changed by the crossing. Could a generation ship survive after Earth goes silent? Yes, but only if it was built to survive more than distance. It would need life support, strong enough to keep bodies alive. It would need repair systems strong enough to resist decay. It would need education strong enough to preserve knowledge. It would need politics strong enough to handle disagreement. It would need archives honest enough to preserve memory. It would need culture deep enough to make life meaningful. And it would need compassion strong enough to keep survival from becoming cruelty. Earth's silence would not instantly destroy the ship. It would reveal what the ship truly is. But if the ship could become its own world, then it might survive. Not unchanged. Never unchanged. It would become quieter, older, more independent, more haunted, and perhaps more careful. It would carry Earth as memory, not as command. It would carry the mission as a choice, not only an inheritance. It would carry humanity not as a perfect treasure, but as a difficult responsibility. And somewhere in deep space, long after the last message from Earth, a child might grow up without ever hearing the planet speak. And still, somewhere in their education, in their songs, in their language, in their body, in the seeds growing under artificial light, Earth would remain. It would remain in the names of plants, in old lullabies no one fully understands, in the shape of maps children study but never walk, in the idea of oceans, in the memory of animals, in the quiet belief that humans once lived under a sky that did not need a ceiling. Silent, distant, unreachable, but not gone, not as a signal, not as a government, not as a voice behind them, but as the origin of a human future that refused to end in silence. That may be the final truth of a generation ship after Earth goes silent. The ship does not survive by waiting forever for home to answer. It survives by becoming capable of answering for itself. And if it can do that, then somewhere between the stars, even in the deepest silence, humanity is still speaking. Thank you for watching this journey through what could happen if a generation ship survived after Earth went silent. If you enjoyed this calm exploration of deep space, subscribe to the channel for more space documentaries like this. Leave a like if you want more slow journeys through the mysteries of the cosmos, and write in the comments what impossible question you want to explore next. Tonight you are watching the Space for Sleep channel, talking about could a generation ship survive after Earth goes silent? Sleep well, and keep looking up. Good night.